With the sport still slightly in shock after that brilliant victory in Australia by Carlos Sainz, we head to a more familiar settings of Suzuka and the Japanese Grand Prix. And to discuss it this weekend, I'm joined by Filip Cleeren, Jake Boxall-Legge and Sam Hall before he hops on a plane. Before we get to them, though, let's have a quick reminder of the standings. And unsurprisingly, it is Max Verstappen that leads the way. He's just got a 4-point advantage over Charles Leclerc at the moment in second. Then it's his teammate Perez, Verstappen's teammate that is, and Carlos Sainz a little bit further back. Running down the order, Piastri, Norris, Russell, Alonso, Stroll on 9 points. Hamilton way back in 10th. Can you believe that? After 3 Grand Prix, he's in 10th. Then Tsunoda, Behrman, still in the standings and ahead of 2 others, Hülkenberg and Magnussen. The rest of them still without any points. When it comes to the constructors, though, well, unsurprisingly, once again, it's Red Bull leading the way, but only 4 points ahead of Ferrari. And at this stage, that's a pretty good result for Ferrari. Then McLaren on 55, Mercedes on 26, and Aston Martin on 25. So we're starting to see some differences, aren't we? Starting to build up the gaps between the teams, and Ferrari very much hanging on to the coattails of Red Bull. So let's get to the chat about the Japanese Grand Prix itself. Well, where do we begin? First of all, the word iconic, it's bandied around a fair bit, isn't it? But I think it's fair to say, JBL, that Suzuka is an iconic track.
Yeah, definitely. It's just the profiles of the corners, the way that the driver's being challenged on every single inch of that racetrack. The opening sector is pretty relentless. I don't know if anyone's ever driven it on a video game, but you really have to think about where you take that first corner and how you take that first corner, because it just sets everything up beyond that. And then you get into the Dunlop curve, you get into the Degners, which, you know, it's as high speed as you want to be. It's just so technical, and the drivers love it. Drivers love going there. And every year, the fan base is just fervent and passionate, and you see every single driver being supported by, you know, hundreds of thousands of fans. It's just such a great place. And I think F1 was poorer without it during the COVID years, for sure. Yeah,
I've not just driven it on various games, I've smashed it. I'm so good around Suzuka. Do you know what? I'm going to move the conversation on to the Japanese Grand Prix itself, but stick somewhat with this Ricciardo Tsunoda angle. And Sam, I want to speak to you a little bit about FP1 in Suzuka that Daniel Ricciardo, if I can say the name right, it's such a tricky name, isn't it? Daniel Ricciardo isn't going to be in the car because they've got the F1 debut over there as well. So tell us a little bit about that, because it seems Daniel Ricciardo's not having the greatest time, as he seems to be struggling. And I read an article, I'm not sure who it was, maybe it was you, JBL, that wrote it, saying about that Mekis has said that we've got to start getting a car to work for Ricciardo. Now, Sam, on this point here, this is going to be the second team that Daniel Ricciardo struggled with the car. So he's not going to be having FP1. It feels like Daniel Ricciardo at the moment needs to have so much confidence. So to take a car away and give it to a debutant, I know it's obligation-wise and stuff like that, but, you know, it seems like poor timing.
Yeah, it's definitely unfortunate timing for him. Brilliant for Ayumu Iwasa, who'll be making his I think it's his FP1 debut. I'm just looking for some nods in the screens below me. Yep, there they are. So yeah, he's making his FP1 debut, and it's his home track. This was planned before Ricciardo had his shoddy start to the season, and I mean it's unfortunate timing, but it's just one of them things that happens across the year. You wouldn't take Yuki out of any session at his home race, so there was only ever one driver that was going to be taken out. If they had a non-Japanese driver in the second seat, I suspect they would have gone, okay, Daniel, you're going to be in the car here. We know you need the seat time. But that just wasn't possible on this occasion. So, poor timing, but it's one of them things. What can you do about it? If you're RB, you've got to put this driver in here. It's the race that makes the most commercial sense.
Yeah, I think I'm pretty much agreed with Sam on that. But yeah, as you say, it's a big opportunity for Japan, for Honda. Both Tsunoda and Iwasa are sort of both Red Bull Honda drivers. So it's a sort of very important thing for them. And it's also something they've done before. When Super Formula driver Naoki Yamamoto took over one of the FP1 seats in 2019. It's always sort of been quite an important race for kind of Red Bull and Honda to kind of use it as a springboard or marketing or something like that. For Ricciardo, it is unfortunate, but he's such an experienced driver. And sure, yeah, the car does need to work for him, but it's not like it's a bad car. It's not like he needs to completely reinvent the wheel. Just needs to find a little bit of... I think there sort of needs to be one kind of breakthrough. Whether he'll find that breakthrough or not, whether that breakthrough is car or whether that breakthrough is him, we don't quite know at this point in time. But it does kind of seem that he's lost his way again. It does feel strangely reminiscent of his time at McLaren, where he sort of steps into the car and he's like, right, how do I drive it? And you've got another driver that's not quite driving around it, but has kind of a bigger picture understanding of how to get the best out of it. So that's kind of how it feels at the moment. Obviously, it'd be sort of nice to see him find that breakthrough, but I think when there's so much pressure in the Red Bull stable, when you've got Liam Lawson or perhaps Iwasa, if he impresses in FP1, kind of looking over your shoulder, I just don't think he's dealing with that degree of pressure quite as well as he'd hoped, especially with the promise, let's say, of a Red Bull seat for 2025. I just don't think he's stepped up to it.
Yeah, it was interesting to see rumours coming out of the media in New Zealand that there was pressure on Ricciardo and some sort of deadline for him to pick up before getting replaced by Liam Lawson. I wonder if there's a link there. No, but honestly, it's actually not looking as bad as it looks on paper, because Ricciardo's pace in the race was pretty similar to Tsunoda in Australia, and he got massively penalised, obviously, for losing his lap in qualifying due to track limits. So obviously that puts you back in traffic, and that kind of ruins your race. So it's not as bad as the McLaren days just yet. It's important to stress. It's not like he's completely lost with the car or doesn't know how to drive it fast. He's lacking a little bit of pace compared to Tsunoda, and I don't think he's as panicked as he would have been 2 years ago. So, as you say, missing FP1 in or any track time in Japan is not helping. But you know, it's still 20 races to go or 21 races to go. So, I don't think it's time to panic just yet.
But it does say a lot when we were just talking about the second Red Bull seat and whether Carlos Sainz should be there or Perez, and throwing some names about. Daniel Ricciardo wasn't a name that we threw in there at all. And I think that just goes to show how poor his results, fair enough, his performances, as Phil rightly says, have not been dreadful, but his results haven't been what they should have been. He hasn't matched Yuki, and we know that Yuki isn't favoured to get that seat, so if he doesn't get it, then that's not a strong case for going, Daniel, you're going to be moving up. And if we're honest, that's the only reason he's in an RB at the moment, because the idea was, okay, you'll be Max's teammate when Sergio goes. So it's, where does Daniel go from here? This year now, it's probably too early to say it, but it now seems to be Red Bull or bust for Daniel, because I don't see the benefit to a driver of his age staying in an RB for more than a season or two. So I could potentially see him going to WEC or maybe IndyCar, NASCAR, something like that next season. If he doesn't get the Red Bull drive, I don't see him staying in an RB long term.
Yeah, one thing's for sure is we're going to see Daniel Ricciardo in racing. He's not going to suddenly stop racing. That is for sure. But let's keep our eyes then on Suzuka itself. Now, JBL, it's moved from September to April, so we know what the track's like. We know how fast and flowing and technical it is. We always use the word technical. Every track's technical, isn't it? But it is one of those fast flowing. It's a fantastic flowing track. It's one of those ones that you look like, if you get a bit of tube and you throw it on the floor and it lands in random patterns, that seems to be Suzuka. It's just one of those fantastic, lovely little flowing circuits. But it being at a different time of year, is that going to throw any technical spanners in the works for teams?
I think it'd be certainly interesting. It should be perhaps a little bit colder than it usually would be, sort of around September kind of time. I don't think the difference will be sort of night and day. I I'm sort of a little bit jealous that I don't get to go at this time of year as well, because it's cherry blossom season. So obviously, sort of walking around the kind of Imperial Palace in Tokyo would look really, really cool. But that's kind of by the by. I don't expect there to be too much in the way of difference. We do have the same tyre compounds as last season as well. Be C1, C2, C3, I believe. So it's stark contrast to what we had in Melbourne, where we had the complete suite of the softest grade rubber. The hard tyre is now the soft tyre. So there are certainly going to be similarities. Whether the weather will change, that was poetry. We don't know at this stage. I did have a sort of cursory look at the planned weather before the weekend, just over in Japan. It sort of seems to be sort of like 17, 18 degrees-ish, so relatively mild, not too much in the way of rain. But as we all know, that can change very, very rapidly. So I think it should be sort of relatively clement over there, and I don't expect too much in the way of surprise. It's not going to be like we're going there in January, it's cold, and there's no way to build up tyre temperature, which is what a lot of Super Formula drivers complain about during testing. They go there in the winter and there's just absolutely no grip out there whatsoever. It's not going to be quite like that. So it should be relatively similar, I would say.
And the fascinating thing about Suzuka is that because it's now much earlier in the year, you've got a much better comparison compared to how teams developed until the end of last year, given that it was late September. So most teams had already developed most of their cars for the 2023 season to their final point, really. So now we can really see who's made the biggest improvements over the winter rather than over the last 12 months, because we could only really compare with circuits that were also very early in the 2023 season. So now we get a much better really sample size of, we've got 4 different circuits. Suzuka, it's a fantastic testing venue. It's got fast corners, slow corners punctuated by a long straight. You've got the SSR that are, some of the best corners on the calendar. So I think this is where there's really no place to hide for anybody. You will see who's got their ducks in a row and who doesn't.
Phil, you wrote an article, I don't know, it was a week ago, maybe not even that long ago, about Mercedes, that they've discovered some interesting trends with the car, that it seems to operate pretty well in the low temperatures and is comparable to the other leading teams. But when the temperatures start to increase, it struggles. So will the fact, who knows what's going to happen weather-wise in Japan, but will the fact that it's earlier in the year help Mercedes, or how do you see this one playing out? Yeah,
I think that's a great point. I mean, looking at the temperatures, if they are 10 degrees lower than they were last year, because it was really hot and humid. If they really do have a high temperature sort of issue, then absolutely this is going to help Mercedes massively compared to racing in 30-degree heat. Absolutely.
Oh, on an aside, by the way, I didn't mention this, but Blossoms of the World, the new podcast by JBL, will be coming to a podcast provider near you. We'll just have to get the trail written for that one. But JBL, if you could start working on that, Blossoms of the World.
Hey, we had a lot of colleagues already there, and the FOMO is real if you look at all the pictures they're posting on Instagram and what have you. So, it looks glorious right now in Japan.
I should definitely get it done. I can't wait to listen to the podcast whenever it comes out. There'll be people disappointed audience members going, what, it's not happening? That's a joke? Come on. I want to hear it. Now, let's just talk about the track itself. I mean, how long has Suzuka been on the F1 calendar for, and a firm fan favourite? So it's got to be three and a half decades, something like that. It's been around for a very, very long time, as we all know. So what should we be expecting from this weekend? What are your main thoughts, Sam?
Safety cars. Safety cars, definitely. As soon as there's a crash there's relatively little runoff, and it's all gravel compared to, or most of it's gravel compared to some of these other tracks that we see with massive asphalt runoffs. So definitely safety cars, yellow flags. It's very common if there's a bit of weather around that you get red flags there. But as JBL says, there's not too much rain in the area at the moment. But I also think that you're going to see McLaren putting in a performance very similar to Australia. We know that it's a sort of track that favours them. Lando Norris has been saying exactly that in the lead up. So, I reckon either Norris or Piastri to be on the podium. If I had to nail my colours to the mast, before the season I made a prediction that Piastri would outscore Norris this season. So I'll get in early. I'll go Piastri on the podium there. Norris can be fourth, but Piastri on the podium.
Flip reverse from the last time out, hey, from the last race. Go on, Phil.
Well, it'll be interesting to see as well how Ferrari's getting on, because obviously the reason why McLaren was on the podium last year was because Ferrari was just nowhere on race performance on demanding circuits like this one. So this will be also a good test for Ferrari to see on another circuit where the tyres are going to get a hell of a punishing, and it'll be a sort of a thermal degradation kind of race like in Bahrain, to see just how much progress they've made. So I would still back Ferrari to do well if they can confirm that progress compared to McLaren. But yeah, it's like I said, it's a perfect test track. It'll hopefully have some implications on the strategy as well. Being such a demanding circuit, we should be getting 2-stop races, which is, as I've said many times before, is really a must if you want to see an interesting race. So I think it's shaping up pretty nicely between Ferrari, McLaren and Mercedes potentially. Obviously, that leaves out Red Bull. We haven't really discussed them even, which I think probably tells you how much we're backing them to be the favourites this weekend again. But it might be closer than we think. He's hoping. I'm just in denial, I know. But
yeah, I think normal service should sort of resume at the front to a certain degree. But again, it kind of depends on what temperatures we get, because if it does end up being unseasonably cold, then we could, particularly on the hard tyre, get quite a lot of graining, just because they're not able to bring the tyres up to temperature, and the tyre skin is sort of bobbling up. So tyre surface rather. So it kind of depends on basically what happens with regards to the tyres, and if it is a graining race, then Ferrari will sort of come into it a little bit more than Red Bull, as we saw in Australia. So that's going to be, I think, an interesting sort of side story of that. But otherwise, I think, you're going to have Ferrari and McLaren fighting for the last spot on the podium if both the Red Bulls don't make it. And I also think that, again, we're going to have a very, very tight battle behind the top 10. That battle over the last couple of points, as we did in Australia, it was a really big win for RB after Alonso's penalty. Tsunoda got 6 points. Haas ended up getting 4, so ended up getting 3. Sorry, so they're kind of lost ground a little bit. So it'll be interesting to see if Williams can get in there, if Sauber can get in there, even if Alpine can get in there. That's sort of that B story of the season, which I'm sort of trying to pay close attention to, because it is hugely interesting. So it'd be interesting to see which of those 5 teams does turn up to Suzuka with the better package. Can't wait to find out.
Okay, final question for you all, and then I will let you go. I know you've got to hop on a plane soon, Sam, but final question is, I don't want you to predict 1, 2, 3. I want you to predict 9th and 10th. Let's go for a 9 or 10 mid-pack. Is it going to be a Haas in there? Where's it going to go? Phil, you can go first on this.
Well, my customary answer is whoever beats Lance Stroll will be 9th. No, kidding aside,
You're not kidding. You're not kidding. There's
I'm
no
not
kidding
kidding.
aside.
No, it's that's kind of what it is, isn't it?
Yeah.
I'd have to go for RB, because I think they have a bit more pace than they showed in the first couple of races, and that sort of became apparent with Tsunoda's race in Melbourne. So yeah, as Tsunoda showed, if they could just get their qualifying in order, especially Ricciardo, looking at you, mate, if you can get qualifying sorted, they're in a good position to be that 6th team in the midfield. But yeah, we'll see. Haas is not looking too bad. I'm a bit frustrated by Williams. I think they have a better car than they've shown so far, through all sorts of gremlins, and obviously Albon's crash in Melbourne is not going to help, racing there with a patched up chassis. So RB for the moment has certainly made the best start, and I think they'll continue that on Tsunoda's home turf. He'll get some extra motivation from that.
So potentially a Tsunoda 10th place with Lance Stroll in 11th, says Phil. Sam?
I will go for... I think I'll go Yuki Tsunoda 9th, and I'll jump on the Haas hype train and I'll go Hülkenberg 10th. And I'm just going to throw this out there. It's not a discussion point, but I'm just going to throw this out there. Mercedes have got a spare seat for next year at the moment that Andrea Kimi Antonelli is possibly being lined up for 26. If I was going to go for a driver for a single season to go to Mercedes, I would go Hülkenberg for 1 year, because then he can get that podium that has been eluding him. You get Hülkenberg in there for 1 year, solid driver, and then Kimi Antonelli the year after. I'll just leave that there for people to think about. Maybe we can pick up at a later point.
Forget JBL's Blossoms of the World podcast. That's now been ditched, and we're replacing it with Antonelli in for a year. Love it or leave it. That's the new podcast, everyone, that we're going to be working on. JBL, who's going to finish 10th and who's going to finish 9th?
I'm just going to answer this question purely to be different, not because I have any sort of real premonitions, but let's say there's a couple of retirements in the usual sort of top 5 teams. Albon and Bottas to get off the mark for the season.
There you go. Nice and simple. We've done it.
No further discussion.
Yeah, no further discussion. You drop the mic and Barack Obama style. There you go. We have done it. We've got through the preview for the Japanese Grand Prix. Gents, thank you very much as always. Well, there you go. That just about does it for our preview of the Japanese Grand Prix. If you liked what you saw, don't forget to hit subscribe, and you can stay up to date with everything Formula One and beyond. Don't forget to tune in on Sunday, where you can catch all of our views on what happened in the Japanese Grand Prix, where we'll discuss all the goings-on over there in Japan. Thanks for watching.